The city lay wrapped in its usual midnight calm, a hush so complete it almost felt sacred. Streetlights flickered over empty sidewalks, while distant cars hummed like sleepy insects. Above, the sky carried no warning, no storm clouds, no winds, nothing to suggest that reality itself was about to rupture. The moon hung pale and steady, casting thin silver lines across rooftops and windows. People slept in their homes, unaware that the final peaceful night of their lives was counting down its last seconds. Then the first crack appeared across the heavens, thin like a fracture on glass. It pulsed once, silent, bright, and then exploded into a bolt of red lightning that slashed downward in a jagged arc. The city trembled as the sky twisted into violent shades of crimson, and a deep, distant rumble traveled across the earth like a heartbeat too massive to belong to anything mortal. Dogs barked, alarms began to chirp, and windows vibrated in their frames as the sky tore further open. The crack grew wider, until it was no longer lightning, but a churning wound, ripped straight through the fabric of existence. Its edges flared with molten light, bending the clouds into spirals of red and black. Winds surged to hurricane speed, pushing debris across empty streets. People jolted awake, staring out of their windows in confusion and terror, unsure whether they were witnessing a celestial event or the end of the world. The rift howled like a living thing, hungry for release. Then it stabilized into a massive circular tear, stretching across the sky like an angry eye staring down at Earth. Silence fell for a breath, long enough for humanity to feel a cold shiver of instinctive fear. Whatever was coming, it wasn't natural, wasn't explainable, and wasn't survivable by ordinary means. The world had no idea that what stepped through next would change history forever. A thunderous roar erupted as the rift convulsed, vomiting out a burning wave of energy that hit the city with the force of a shockwave. The first shapes to emerge were silhouettes, tall, thin, jagged, shifting in the glow like demons birthed from the sun. Then they fully crossed over, bloodletters with blazing swords, snarling faces stretched into monstrous grins, and bodies carved from muscle and fury. They charged down in massive numbers, landing on buildings and streets with explosive impact. The ground split open from their arrival, sending flames bursting into the sky. Behind them rode monstrous juggernauts, brass-plated beasts snorting steam and molten froth as they crushed cars under their massive hooves. Shadows shifted again as berserkers stomped through the rift, brass-armored warriors drenched in dried blood, roaring battle cries that vibrated through every soul within hearing distance. Their presence alone turned the air heavy with violence, as if the atmosphere itself wanted to flee from them. Buildings closest to the rift collapsed instantly under the supernatural pressure, crumbling into dust that turned into spirals of fire. Streets caught flame as bloodletters carved their molten blades into the asphalt, releasing bursts of unnatural energy. Civilians screamed and scattered, but every direction was swallowed by chaos. Red smoke curled down from the sky, staining the horizon until everything looked drenched in blood. Panic spread faster than the fires, and the city transformed into a battlefield within minutes. Then the colossal shadow appeared behind the horde, massive, horned, and radiating such raw power that even the demons fell silent. Khorne himself stepped forward, each footfall cracking the sky's light around him. His armor bled heat, and his eyes glowed like twin furnaces ready to incinerate worlds. He looked down upon Earth with the cold hunger of a god who existed only for war. With a single roar, he unleashed his army in every direction, beginning the Age of Blood. Across the world, emergency networks exploded with frantic reports. Satellites detected impossible energy spikes, and communication towers flickered until signals warped into static. Governments attempted to assess the threat, but each passing minute drowned them in new horrors. Cities across continents fell into blackout as red storms appeared overhead. Every military force scrambled to action, but none had ever faced something that did not fear bullets, fire, or death. Fighter jets launched in desperate formations, streaking toward the rift with engines blazing. But before they could converge, swarms of winged demons intercepted them, ripping through steel like paper. Explosions lit the sky as jets fell burning into neighborhoods, turning residential streets into flaming craters. Tank battalions rolled out, firing shells that tore chunks off buildings, but barely scratched the demonic beasts charging toward them. Soldiers fought bravely, only to be cut down in seconds. News stations across the globe broadcast scenes of carnage, fires raging uncontrollably, towers collapsing under demonic force, and civilians trapped beneath the debris. Reporters screamed as chaos engulfed them, and one by one the broadcasts cut out, replaced by static. Panic overtook entire nations as millions tried to flee their cities, creating stampedes that only added to the nightmare. The world had faced wars, disasters, and invasions before, but never an enemy that devoured entire armies without slowing. By the 12th minute, global defense lines had collapsed. Humanity realized it wasn't facing an invasion. It was facing extermination. Deep inside the fortified command center where the world's greatest heroes operated, alarms blared loud enough to rattle the steel walls. Screens flashed red warnings, each one showing another city falling under demonic assault. The ground shook from distant explosions as the Wart Storm expanded across continents. Heroes gathered in silence, watching the destruction unfold, with grim expressions. This was not an enemy they had ever imagined facing. The emergency beacon flared to life, projecting the image of a city completely consumed by fire. Demons marched in endless waves, led by a monstrous figure towering above the ruins. Even the most battle-hardened heroes felt a chill run through them as they recognized the presence of something ancient and hateful. This wasn't an alien empire, a rogue army, or a cosmic tyrant. This was war incarnate. They exchanged tense glances, each understanding the unspoken truth. Thousands were already dead, and millions more would follow if they didn't act. Weapons were checked, armor sealed, powers ignited. Their HQ trembled again, this time harder, as the warp storm expanded close enough to distort the building's lights. Nothing about this threat felt physical. It felt mythical, like something pulled from a nightmare too old to have a name. One hero finally broke the silence. This isn't from our universe. It's something older, darker, made of pure war. With that, they moved out, ready to face the impossible and defend a world already burning. Humanity's last hope stepped into the fire. The moment the heroes arrived, the city was almost unrecognizable. What had once been a network of crowded streets and shining buildings was now a maze of fire, collapsed towers, and molten debris. Smoke curled around the ruins like the breath of some monstrous creature, and the ground trembled under every distant explosion. They moved forward cautiously, weapons raised, scanning the shadows where warped shapes twisted in and out of view. The silence lasted only seconds before a roar split the air. A pack of bloodletters burst from behind a shattered bus, charging with blades raised high, their eyes glowing like burning coals. The heroes sprang into action immediately, intercepting the first wave with a coordinated strike. Steel clashed with demonic flesh, sparks flying as blades met molten armor. The demons fought with unnatural speed, their movements jerky and violent, as if every motion was pulled by a string of pure hatred. Even the ground shook under their assault. Explosions erupted across the street as one hero released a blast that threw several demons into a crumbling storefront. Cars were hurled into the air by shockwaves, flipping wildly before smashing into walls. The juggernauts followed next, massive beasts pounding through the wreckage, their hooves smashing through concrete like brittle wood. Every hit from them sent shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. The heroes struggled to keep formation as more demons spilled from the rift's spreading influence. But despite the overwhelming force of the horde, the heroes pushed back with relentless determination. Each one carved out moments of triumph, flinging demons into fire, shielding civilians trapped beneath rubble, or striking with precision that sent waves of monsters collapsing. It was chaotic, brutal, and exhausting, yet somehow they held the line long enough to create a pocket of stability. It wasn't victory, but it was survival. And for the first time since the invasion began, survival felt like a win. A deep tremor rolled through the battlefield, stronger than anything they had felt before. Fires dimmed as if sucked inward, and even the demons paused, turning their heads toward the center of the destroyed street. The heroes followed their gaze and saw a massive shadow approaching through waves of heat. Every step of the figure cracked the ground and sent embers swirling into spirals. It was as if the city itself recoiled from his presence. Khorne emerged from the smoke like a nightmare given form. Towering above the ruins, his armor glowed with molten cracks, and horns curled around a skull-like helm that watched everything with burning rage. His axe alone was larger than a car, dripping with energy that hissed and burned the air. When he stepped forward, the heroes felt the temperature spike, their breathing growing heavier under the pressure of his presence. This wasn't a commander. This wasn't a monster. This was a god. Without warning, Khorne swung his axe through a line of burning wreckage, sending a shockwave that blasted the heroes backward. The street split open, fire erupting like a volcanic burst. He moved faster than anything his size should, crossing the distance in mere seconds. One hero launched an attack at full force, but Khorne swatted it aside as if brushing away dust. Another hero tried to restrain him, only to be grabbed and hurled through an entire building that collapsed instantly. Their combined attacks hardly slowed him. Blasts detonated against his armor, sparks scattering uselessly. Lightning, fire, weapons, nothing pierced the demonic plates or even made him take a single step back. Khorne's roar shook the sky, shattering windows blocks away and sending shockwaves through the heroes' bones. They realized with sinking dread that this wasn't a fight they could win head-on. They were facing a being forged from the concept of war itself. Khorne raised his axe again, and the heroes braced for the strike that might end them all. The battle spiraled into a storm of chaos as Khorne's army surged around its master with renewed ferocity. The heroes fought desperately, but even their strongest abilities felt like sparks against a furnace. Buildings fell like sandcastles, each collapse sending plumes of dust into the fiery sky. Civilians were still trapped beneath rubble or cornered by demons, forcing the heroes to split their efforts between survival and rescue. Every second stretched their limits further than they had ever experienced before. One of the heroes was overwhelmed trying to shield a group of survivors, struck down by a juggernaut's brutal charge. Their body crashed into a pile of debris, leaving them unconscious and barely breathing. The sight shook the team to their core. Their formation broke, and for a moment, panic crept into their hearts. The demons seized the opportunity, surrounding them in tightening circles. Blades flashed, claws swiped, and the sound of roaring flames drowned out the heroes. Shouts. Across the world, the situation worsened. Reports streamed in. Cities swallowed in fire. Countries falling silent. Battlefronts dissolving within minutes. The warp storm expanded without slowing, threatening to swallow continents. Even the sky began to distort, colors swirling unnaturally, as reality bent under the gods' presence. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Earth was losing. Humanity was losing. And the heroes, despite their power, were being pushed to the edge of defeat. The remaining heroes pulled back into the ruins of a broken tower, dragging their injured ally with them. Breathing heavily, covered in ash and blood, they stared at the burning horizon, where Khorne's silhouette loomed large over the city, like a declaration of doom. The world's defenders had never looked so small, so fragile. For the first time since the invasion started, they felt something they rarely allowed themselves to feel. Fear. As the heroes regrouped within the shattered remains of the tower, the world outside continued to collapse. Flames licked the sides of buildings, smoke darkened what was left of the sky, and the shrieks of bloodletters echoed through the streets like cries from hell itself. The heroes surrounded their wounded ally, administering what aid they could while trying to steady their own shaking hands. They were battered, exhausted, and nearly broken, but they were not done. Amid the chaos, one hero noticed fluctuations in the sky, patterns in the warp rift that pulsed and shifted differently than before. They focused, analyzing the distortion, and finally understood the truth. Khorne wasn't here naturally. He was tethered to the rift. His power, his army, his continued presence on Earth depended on that cosmic wound remaining open. The realization hit the group with the force of a revelation. They didn't have to kill a god. They only had to sever his path. Plans formed quickly, drawn out with shaky hands on cracked stone surfaces. They would need to cut through the thickest part of the demon army, reach the rift, and deploy a coordinated strike powerful enough to destabilize it. It wouldn't banish Khorne permanently, but it would force him back into the warp. The heroes exchanged glances filled with determination and fear. The mission sounded impossible, suicidal even, but it was their only chance. Outside, the roar of approaching demons drew closer, rattling the tower's broken frame. The heroes stood up, one by one, armor dented, weapons scorched, but eyes burning with renewed resolve. They had lost ground, lost allies, and nearly lost hope, but they hadn't lost their purpose. With a final look toward the blood-red sky, they prepared to make their stand. If Earth was going to fall, it wouldn't fall without a fight. The heroes emerged from the shattered tower and moved through the burning ruins with a grim, unified purpose. Fires lit the broken city in waves of orange and crimson, and the distant sky pulsed with a dark, unnatural glow. Every direction echoed with roars, explosions, and the inhuman clang of demonic weapons. They pushed forward in silence, conserving strength, their boots crunching over glass and stone as they advanced toward the rift, hovering above the city like a bleeding wound. Even wounded and exhausted, their steps remained steady. Demons sensed their movement almost instantly. Bloodletters leapt from collapsed rooftops, their blades raised and dripping with molten light. The heroes didn't hesitate. They rushed forward, cutting through the first wave with a combination of speed and precision born from desperation. One hero swung through the front line, scattering demons into fire and smoke. Another unleashed energy blasts that lit the night with blinding flashes, tearing apart groups of monsters before they could surround them. As they advanced, juggernauts thundered through the wreckage, crushing cars and tearing through chunks of pavement as they charged. The ground shook under every hoofbeat, and the air vibrated with their metallic bellows. But the heroes met them head-on. One hero vaulted upward, landing atop a beast's armored skull and driving a weapon down its molten spine. Another tackled the side of a charging beast, redirecting its momentum into a collapsed overpass that caved in around it. Every second demanded perfect timing. The closer they came to the rift, the more reality warped. Colors twisted unnaturally, buildings bent at impossible angles, and gravity flickered in pulses that made the ground feel unstable. The heroes stumbled through floating debris and burning fragments of buildings suspended in midair. They pressed on, adapting to the shifting environment, each step more treacherous than the last. The warp energy thickened the air until it felt like they were walking through molten glass. The next wave hit harder. Dozens of brass-armored berserkers barreled down the ruined avenue, swinging axes that tore huge arcs through the air. Their armor gleamed like molten metal, and their roars shook dust loose from distant rooftops. The heroes formed a tight circle, countering blow after blow. Sparks exploded around them as weapons clashed, and their battle cries mixed with the sound of metal splitting. One hero deflected a killing strike just as another delivered a burst of energy that sent several berserkers flying. Explosions erupted around them as stray demonic blasts turned the battlefield into a storm of fire and flying debris. The heroes ducked behind overturned vehicles and broken concrete slabs, returning fire with coordinated attacks that created pockets of space in the chaos. They leapt forward again, forcing their way through the frenzied mob, each one carving a path toward the rift's towering vortex. Their movements blurred into a rhythm of violence and precision. The rift loomed larger, swirling with crimson storms and jagged bolts of warp lightning. It cast an eerie glow that made the shadows dance in wild patterns. Demonic energy spiraled upward from the earth, feeding the massive tear above the city. The heroes felt its pull like a living force trying to drag them off balance. Their hearts pounded harder as the pressure increased, pushing them to slow. But they refused. They pressed on, even as exhaustion clawed at their muscles. A sudden scream behind them drew their attention as another squad of demons launched themselves from the rooftops. The heroes turned, intercepting the ambush with desperate strength. Every strike grew heavier. Every breath burned hotter. But they refused to give ground. They fought like the last defenders of humanity, because that's exactly what they were. Bloodletters fell, berserkers shattered, and juggernauts collapsed under their combined assault. The ground suddenly split beneath them, opening into a fissure that glowed with searing heat. They jumped across, one by one, dodging the eruptions of flame that burst upward. Behind them, entire streets collapsed into molten pits. Ahead, the massive vortex pulsed again, releasing a blast of crimson shockwaves that nearly knocked them off their feet. They shielded themselves and pushed forward, their silhouettes cutting through the falling embers. Through the smoke and chaos, the rift finally came into full view. It hovered above a crater of broken streets, swirling like a colossal hurricane of red lightning and black fire. Demons poured endlessly from its center, spilling across the city like a living tide. The heroes stood at the edge of the crater, staring up at the impossible sight. Their mission was clear, and the path to it was paved with fire and corpses. They readied their weapons, tightened their grips, and took the final step forward. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The heroes stepped into the crater, and the entire battlefield shook as a massive surge of energy erupted from the rift. The swirling vortex brightened, flashes of molten gold and deep crimson spiraling outward. The air trembled as if struggling to hold its shape, and the ground beneath their feet cracked under the weight of the incoming presence. The heroes raised their weapons, knowing exactly what was about to emerge. The fires parted, and Khorne stepped into view. He descended from the center of the vortex, his colossal form wrapped in streams of molten light. His armor glowed with jagged cracks of living flame, and his axe radiated so much heat the air rippled around it. He landed with an impact that shook the crater, sending waves of dust and broken stone outward like a blast wave. The heroes staggered, steadying themselves as they faced the god of war himself at full strength. Khorne stared down at them with burning eyes that reflected nothing but contempt. His very presence overloaded the senses. Heat, pressure, and the metallic scent of blood thickened the air. He raised his axe, the edge glowing like the heart of a volcano, and pointed it toward the heroes as if marking them for execution. Then, with a roar that shattered glass across the city, he charged. His first strike tore the ground apart, carving a trench through the center of the crater. The heroes scattered, each one barely dodging the killing blow. One hero countered with a blast that struck Khorne's armor and exploded in a shower of sparks. It left no mark. Another launched forward, swinging with full force, only for Khorne to catch the weapon mid-swing and hurl the hero across the battlefield like discarded debris. The heroes regrouped, attacking together in a coordinated strike. Energy beams, steel, fire, lightning, everything they had collided with the blood god in a single blast. The explosion lit the sky in a blinding flash. For a moment, they thought they had weakened him. But as the smoke cleared, Khorne walked through it unharmed, dragging his axe through the ground, carving molten lines in the stone. His roar shook the crater again. He charged a second time, faster than something his size should be. His axe collided with the earth, sending shockwaves that launched heroes off their feet. One hero took a direct hit from the side, crashing into a broken building that collapsed around them. Another blocked a downward strike with a shield that cracked down the center. The force sent them sliding across the battlefield, armor sparking against the rubble as they slammed into the far wall of the crater. Despite the overwhelming force, the heroes refused to retreat. They reformed their line, gasping for breath, yet pushing forward again. They struck low, high, wide, every angle, every technique. A combination attack staggered Khorne for a brief second. It was barely a step, but it was proof he could be pushed. They pressed the advantage, driving him back with a flurry of attacks that lit the battlefield with flashes of light. Khorne responded with fury. He swung his axe in a massive arc that cut through collapsing buildings, sending an avalanche of fire and breaking stone toward them. The heroes dodged, rolled, leapt through falling debris. One hero was caught by a blast of heat and dropped to one knee, chest heaving as the air burned their lungs. Another hero shielded them, deflecting lethal strikes with desperate precision. The fight stretched minutes into an eternity. Every movement became slower, heavier. Their energy faded, while Khorne's rage only burned hotter. He drove them into a corner of the crater, raising his axe for a final, devastating blow. The heroes braced themselves, realizing they might not survive the next second. Then one hero, battered and barely standing, ignited the last of their strength and launched a direct attack at Khorne's exposed side. The hit wasn't lethal, but it was enough to make him recoil. It opened a moment, small, fragile, but real. The others seized it instantly. They combined everything they had left in a final coordinated surge, slamming into Khorne with a storm of power that detonated in a massive shockwave. Khorne staggered back toward the rift, roaring in fury as the energy tore at his armor. The vortex behind him began to pull harder, reacting to the disruption. The heroes didn't stop. They channeled every drop of power, driving Khorne closer to the vortex's edge. Reality shook, lightning erupted, and the ground split as the blood god struggled against the pull. The heroes pushed harder. Khorne dug his massive claws into the shattered earth, fighting the pull of the closing vortex. His roar thundered across the crater, echoing through the burning ruin of the city. The heroes strained, their bodies trembling as they unleashed the last sparks of their strength. Energy streamed from their hands, weapons, and hearts, forming a blinding wave that hammered the blood god with relentless force. The vortex grew unstable, swirling violently as beams of red lightning arced outward. Shattered pieces of the battlefield lifted into the air, pulled toward the churning center. The heroes held their ground against the storm, weaning into the gale as they pushed Khorne back. The pull increased, dragging him closer inch by inch. Flames wrapped around his armor, and cracks glowed brighter along the plates covering his massive form. He roared again, swinging his axe wildly. A blast of molten heat tore across the battlefield, nearly knocking one hero off their feet. Another hero threw themselves in front of them, taking the hit and collapsing with a cry. But the team didn't break. They tightened their formation, forcing their power forward as the vortex reached its critical point. Khorne's feet slipped, scraping across the ground as the pull grew stronger. His roars turned to furious snarls. With a final desperate move, He slammed his axe into the earth, anchoring himself. The impact sent a shockwave across the crater, nearly breaking the hero's stance. Several were thrown backward, landing hard among the rubble. But one hero remained standing, teeth gritted, channeling everything into the destabilizing rift. The vortex emitted a deafening shriek, and the energy split into beams that wrapped around Khorne like chains. The god of war thrashed violently, breaking some bindings, but not all. The heroes pushed again, their bodies shaking, their vision blurring, and then, with one final surge of combined strength, the last chain of warp energy locked around the blood god. The ground beneath him collapsed, and the vortex pulled with a force that tore the very air. Khorne roared one last time, a sound filled with rage, hatred, and the promise of return. Then the vortex swallowed him whole, dragging his massive form into the swirling red void, until only sparks of molten light remained. The crater went silent. The vortex snapped shut in a burst of blinding light. The sky cleared almost instantly, the red storms fading into pale ash-gray clouds. Fire still burned across the city. Rubble still lay in mountains. But the weight that had pressed on the world lifted at last. The heroes stood in stunned silence, unable to believe the god was truly gone. But the victory had cost them dearly. Several teammates lay unconscious, injured or barely breathing. Their armor hung in pieces. Their weapons were melted or shattered. Blood stained the rubble beneath them, some demonic, some their own. The battlefield around them looked like the skeleton of a dying world. One hero knelt beside the fallen ally who had taken Khorne's earlier blast. They checked for a pulse, relief washing over their face when they felt a faint heartbeat. They signaled the others, and together they lifted their injured comrades. The dust hung thick around them as they walked through the ruined crater toward the broken edge of the city. The world outside was quiet, almost eerily so. The demons that had once filled the streets were gone, their forms having evaporated the moment the blood god was pulled back into the warp. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, and the fires crackled softly among the ruins. It was a victory, but one marked by devastation on a scale humanity had never known. As emergency forces approached the edge of the city, the heroes stood together amid the destruction. Battered, but still upright, they did not celebrate. They did not cheer. They simply breathed in the silence of a world that had been moments away from annihilation. They had won, but the scars would remain forever, carved into the land, the sky, and their memories. The sun began to rise through the smoke, painting the ruins in pale orange light. As the sun pushed its first rays through the veil of ash, the city took on a strange, haunting glow. Fires simmered gently, sending thin trails of smoke rising into the slowly clearing sky. The streets were littered with broken stone, shattered metal, and reminders of a war that had nearly consumed the world. But through the devastation came the first signs of life, distant voices, flickering lights, and the movement of survivors emerging from the ruins. The heroes stood atop a broken highway overpass overlooking the city. Their bodies ached with every breath, bruises forming beneath torn armor, and dried blood etched into their skin. The silence around them felt heavy, but peaceful, a rare calm in the wake of unstoppable chaos. They breathed it in, letting the exhaustion settle into their bones. The battle was over. For the first time in hours, the world was no longer screaming. Below, emergency crews began navigating the wreckage. Flashing lights marked the arrival of medics and rescue squads who rushed toward trapped civilians. The heroes watched as ordinary people, those without powers, armor, or special training, stepped bravely into the ruins. It was a reminder that humanity's strength didn't come only from its heroes, but from its collective will to survive. Seeing them gave the heroes a quiet sense of hope. One hero knelt near the edge of the overpass, staring out at the horizon where the rift had once torn through the sky. Only faint traces of red lightning lingered, dissipating slowly like fading scars. They touched the cracked concrete with a hand still trembling from the final battle. They could still feel the energy of the rift pulsing beneath the surface of their memories. Even closed, it left a mark deeper than stone. The others joined them, forming a loose circle. They talked softly, voices raw but steady. Some spoke of what they had seen during the battle, the moment they thought they would die, the terror of facing a god, the faces of civilians they managed to save. Others remained silent, letting the moment pass without words. Everyone felt the weight of what they had endured. Everyone knew the world would never look the same again. The horizon brightened as the sun rose higher, bathing the ruined city in warm light. It exposed the shattered towers, the broken bridges, the long scars carved into the earth by Khorne's arrival. But it also touched the survivors gathering in the streets, helping each other climb through debris, carrying the wounded, calling out names in desperate hope. The light revealed not just destruction, but resilience. One hero spoke softly, the words carrying a tired but steady conviction. "We stopped him, but chaos doesn't end, not forever." The others nodded, understanding all too well that Khorne's defeat was only temporary. The warp was endless, its gods were eternal, and somewhere in the depths of that twisted dimension, the blood god would gather his strength again. But that was not today's problem. Today, they had won. As helicopters approached and rescue teams spotted them, the heroes slowly stood, lifting their injured allies and preparing to descend from the overpass. They made their way down the cracked concrete, helping each other with quiet gestures, their steps slow but certain. Civilians reached out to them as they passed, relief painted across their faces. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the heroes allowed themselves to feel a spark of pride. When they reached the ground, they paused. The wind carried the faint scent of ash, mixed with the first hints of morning air. The city was wounded, but alive. Humanity was battered, but breathing. The heroes stood together one last time, united not by victory, but by survival. The world had been dragged to the edge of annihilation and pulled back at the last possible moment. As the sun fully crested the horizon, the light warmed their faces. They looked out at the land they had saved, not perfect, not peaceful, but enduring. And with a final, quiet moment of understanding shared between them, they walked into the dawn, ready for whatever came next. The war was over, for now.